Hey everybody, we are looking at our Song of Storms tutorial. I want this video to begin our process of mixing, starting with drum mixing. So what we're going to have to look at first is everything at a good level. As I've explained before, I like to organize all of my buses or my collection tracks here. So all this stuff is kind of irrelevant, hopefully. So if we play at our loudest spot in the song, which is right now, what we're basically checking for is if anything is clipping. And clipping is basically a word that means your volume is at such a point where it can't be replicated without creating some sort of distortion or layer. In baby terms, you know, where your music's too loud and it screws up. Luckily, Reaper will create a red bar whenever any track gets too much volume. If something is too loud, you need to reduce it. And that doesn't just mean, you know, drop it down here. For example, we could have clipping inside Guitar Rig. So if I took my lead guitar track and I boosted the volume like all the way to 10, then in this chain down here, we're going to actually have clipping happening. But if I reduce the volume here with a limiter, what happens is the volume of my guitar tone will go back down to where it's okay in Guitar Rig. However, we are still clipping, and you may not be able to tell, but if you listen closely and have a good pair of headphones, you'll start hearing like you'll basically hear the audio quality start to suck. So what you want to do is make sure that your volumes are always at a very consistent level. You don't want it too quiet, or else you'll hear more noise than you'll hear sound. But just keep that in mind. Luckily, as I record, I sort of play with the volume levels to make sure that everything is okay. So right now, everything sounds, you know, acceptably good. Now, the mixing process I'm going to follow here is by going to each one of our instruments and kind of adding basic mixing effects, such as EQ or equalization, compression, or anything else I can kind of think of. And when I say we start with the drums, the reason why is because I feel like the drums can independently be mixed, the volumes of each instrument, and then mixed inside the song. So let's just take a listen to some of this, and I'll explain why I'm doing the things I'm doing. Again, everything is up to your own taste, but this is how I'm getting the sound that I personally like. So what I'm doing here is basically just volume-based mixing, and the reason why I don't have any effects on any of these particular things is because all of my effects are actually loaded in Superior Drummer's mixer. And just for reference, although I'd highly recommend you work on your own on these, I have transients which kind of kill some of the sustain for some of the kick, as well as some EQ. Basically what I'm doing here for the kick drum is I'm boosting where I found most of the oomph of the lower sub bass to be, but I'm not you know, making it to where it's gonna clip or be terrible. And then I'm keeping some of the click so that we have that traditional metal sound. You can still follow the rhythm. You should always try to mix at a kind of low volume level to make sure that, you know, from far away, if you ever listen to a song on the radio, the number one thing you can hear is, you know, maybe like the snare and the vocals and like the most important parts that keep you aware of where the rhythm is. You know, you can feel the groove because these important instruments are very prominent in our mix. So I want to keep the same. The snares here have, you know, slight compression. And of course, what a compressor does is once the volume hits a certain point, basically this bend, it starts acting to control the volume by slowly lowering it down with you know, specific algorithms. The ratio is how harshly it's going to be doing this. For every amount of volume put in, you know, how much is it going to let through? The threshold is when it starts acting, and you know, if we lower it down, it'll start acting sooner. The attack is how long specifically before it starts attacking. So if we have this number small, it's going to be very quick and very obvious when the volume changes happen. Release is how much after how much after the compressor is done acting, when the volume goes down, that we let go. So if we have a short release, then it's also going to sound a little unnatural. For example, if you have a long attack, so it takes a while for it to hit, then you're going to have this smooth entrance of volume, for lack of a better term. And then if we have a fast release, you'll get this like pumping feeling. Now, makeup gain is what happens when, to keep the volume at a somewhat consistent level, because the compressor is theoretically, it's pushing down the volume. So if we want that volume back, but just to stay the same, then we would keep a tight ratio, where it's flat, and then we would keep it there with makeup gain. You could also boost it as well, in case something is too quiet. So for another instrument like violin, I'll add a compressor that will boost the volume if it gets too quiet, so that way it stays in the mix. Just a little compressor lesson for you guys. I don't like to go into detail for all of this because I think it's better to experiment. But I add some equalization to things like toms so that they have the rumble, but I'll keep the volume down so they don't stay too long. Again, these are all going to buses inside Superior Drummer, and each one of these has its own effects, such as compression on our overheads, which I keep very light. I like to model mine after Maximum Hamburger's sound. He's the drummer for Gemini and an awesome friend of mine. And he actually taught me probably more about drum mixing than anybody, so please give him a check out if you have not yet. Now that we have kind of like the drum sounding at a fair volume, we can kind of equalize, and there's a couple things that I like to follow here. Basically, I'm going to be using Fabfilter Pro Q. I highly recommend this or any parametric EQ software, but you can get away with anything. So just listening on its own, so we have a decent curve here. I don't like to have the overheads too high because we're going to hear them a lot in metal music. The overhead mics are getting all of our cymbals and hi-hat and some of the tom and snare, just the high end. So what we're going to do here is play. And what I'm going to do is click down to create the first node. And I right click and create what's called a high cut or a low pass filter. I know that they're reverses, but deal with it. So basically what a low pass filter does for us here is it cuts off any of the way too high end that you'll hear in the 10K and 20K, because this is starting to be noise. And if there's one thing this track has a lot of, it's noise. Like, I mean, look at this. There's plenty of stuff up there, so don't need it. Same for the bottom. We'll make a high pass filter, but we want to keep that kick drum. So try to find a point where you can still hear and feel the sub bass. And if we're using monitors, you can definitely feel it, or if you have like a subwoofer. So I'm also going to click here and make another node, but it'll be a bell curve. And I can hold control and thin it out, the Q, which is basically a specific thing. And what we're going to do is raise it up, and I'll just show you how to do it with the knobs. We increase the gain, and we kind of search for the frequency that we want to boost a little. And because we have it gained so much, it'll be more apparent. And this process is called telescoping. So since I found it, I widened it so that it would have more of a apparent effect there. And I'm just going to kind of like do the same. It's more obvious if you boost something than if you take something away. So definitely think more about cutting away bad frequencies. And bad ones are the ones that are in the way of other things. So let's try to make sure the snare has some space, but not too much. So this is where the rhythm and bass guitar sort of enter. So I'm going to cut away from that. Just going to show you with the mix now. Now, we've noticed whenever we're hitting a snare, it's popping up here. So the snare is kind of sitting here. It also has some high end here, and I want it to stay. So we're going to cut away those from the guitar part, maybe a little bit of that. But let's try to make sure there's space for everyone else. Now, I usually find there's a lot of empty space here in the drums because of the overheads and stuff, and I've already EQ'd a lot of them in my drum preset. So I don't want to waste too much time and kill more than I need to. But we're going to get rid of some of the overheads where the lead guitars sit too. So let's try to like block the lead guitars with a gain. And once you can't hear the guitars too well, that's when you know that that area of frequency is blocking the lead guitars. It's all just about putting together a puzzle. I'm just cutting away a little bit where the snare is hitting too much. Again, we're just trying to fit things, make it all balanced. So I personally like that. Now let's play with the compressor. I have it on default a little here, but basically what we're gonna do is set this to really default. And I like using a more jagged edge. I think this is an aesthetic. And what we're going to do here is listen to the drums and try to find a place where we should start pushing it down. Again, if you compress your drums too much, it's going to sound faker and faker. So let's just try to have the ratio around like 10 because we're compressing it for metal. Just to show you, of course, like... The kind of dumb, basic way of looking at this is that compressor is making stuff louder, but we want it to be controlled. So notice that I've been reducing stuff as I'm going through this. I think I'm going to be spending a lot of times on drums here, so you know, take your time with drums. I'm going to decrease the attack and release as much as I can so that we don't make this so unrealistic. Now that's acceptable for me. Honestly, I'm not claiming to be an expert again, but this is just what I've been doing to get everything to sound punchy. So now that we have that pumping and, you know, kicking, listen to the loudest spots. You know, listen to the most drum-oriented spots. So I have a drum solo sort of going on here. I personally think that that sounded really freaking awesome. And it sounded human. I looked at the Superior Drummer thing while it was going on to make sure, you know, that a human can play this, in fact, which is a huge factor. Sometimes I do hear programmed drums that are just impossibly hard, or they just don't sound like something a drummer would play to fit into the song. So make good choices, kids. Now that we've taken a look at the drums and kind of fit them into the song, we're going to look at the guitars. Specifically, I want to look at the rhythm guitars first. The reason why I start with drums is I wholeheartedly believe that drums should be kind of the most prominent in a song. Specifically, your kick and snare, they really hold together the rhythmic elements of the song. And since we're in like a waltzy thing, we don't want to lose that. Now the guitars, however, they're going to be a little chunky. We're going to have to look at it with a couple effects. So let's listen to it soloed. Notice that I have a lot of cuts and stuff here. That's mostly because I recorded a lot of these stuff segment by segment in order to make sure that I got the best take. It's very common in metal to have this going on, so, you know, if you think that that's kind of bad or whatever, you know, sucks to suck. But, you know, you do the best you can, and if you can replicate it live, then no one's going to give you any crap about it. Basically what I want to do here is similar to our drums. You know, EQing is just basically about bringing out the frequencies that you want that instrument to have, and then taking away the ones that you don't want it to have, or taking away things that you want to make space for others. So let's listen to it in the mix and kind of decide. So I'm going to put a low pass filter here, or a high cut, and we're just going to have it level and kill off some of this noise here. And I'm going to do the same at the bottom because we have a bass guitar and the drums that we got to think about. Now, the bass guitar I know for a fact because I can look at the EQ, and I'll just go ahead and add the same effects chain that I saved for the bass so that we can have it there. Let me close that out so you don't get confused. And basically, knowing that the bass is going to be here helps a lot, and we can hear it. And don't just listen to the same riff, because we have different rhythmic elements going on. Now the next thing I'm going to do is scoop out some of the mids, which can give a bit of clarity, but I'm not going to cut away too much, or else we're going to have a really empty sort of song. And a lot of metalcore bands back then, particularly, and it's one of my favorite bands, so get me wrong, Pantera, the guitar tone is very scooped, as they call it. And as a result, you feel a lot of emptiness in the song. And I personally don't like that. So let's not have it. Now, how do we scoop the mids? Well, to kind of go over a lesson I missed, for really beginners, of course, this low area here is our bass, you know, the 20 to like 100 area. So you're going to hear like the lowest instruments reach there. Now, as we get to like 100 to 500, we're starting to hit low mids. This can include my voice right now. It can include lower guitars, the upper register of our bass guitar, some of our lead guitars, instruments like the piano. There's a fantastic spectrum of musical instrument frequencies that I'm going to leave in my video description if you want. And it's important to know where things are in general, but also listen with your ears for where things are sitting. Now, the lower mids are where a lot of the bulbousy part of our guitar are. So I'm going to take away a little bit about it so we can get some definition, leave some space. Now, you're going to start to feel like it becomes a little softer. So, you know, we'll reduce as needed, but I think that was all right. I'm going to take away some from here as well to make room for the lead guitars. So let's listen to this part again with the leads and try to, you know, block them with our telescopy boosted part, and then, you know, invert it, basically, you know, take away what's getting in the way. Basically what I'm going to do for a video is re-record the video shots that I want to do. So like a rhythm guitar shot, a bass guitar shot, a lead guitar shot. And while I re-record them, I'm going to have the camera on. That's all there is to it. I know some people like to just fake the video, which is much more convenient, and I have no problem with, and have done so. But just a heads up on how I like to do things to match the video part. So basically, that's how our rhythm guitar is going to get EQ'd. Now, I do compress them as well, but you want to be careful, or else you're going to have, again, a very unnatural sounding guitar. So let's listen to something like... And what we can do with Pro C, Fabfilter Pro C, or maybe any compressor, is kind of observe how flat this is. Basically, a compressor is kind of like pushing down any spikes. And, you know, that's why I want to keep the ratio very light. We should also have the attack very slow, so it's very natural, as well as the release. And that way, we can kind of just hear it being tight, jagged, but, you know, not too much. We want the balance. Now, I'm pretty satisfied with that, and hopefully you can understand why. You do want to listen to parts that have a lot of spikes. Like, as we lead into the Ballad of the Goddesses here, I kind of do a little genty thing. So the main texture, if I might use that word, is you just want things to be as aggressive as you want your ears to feel. Like, I don't want it to be harsh. I want it to be kind of smooth, but still have aggression, and that's what we're getting. So I think I'm pretty content with that, but I do add one extra effect. So if you have a stereo imager or any sort of width booster, I like to spread out the rhythm guitars so that we can make sure they're not in the way of anything. I haven't talked too much about panning yet, but I like to have the center only have our kick and snare and bass, maybe vocals if we're doing that kind of thing. And then the rhythm guitars are spaced out far, but we do want to bring back some of it. So let's just hear it. Basically what this imager does, and I'm using the Izotope Ozone 5 imager, the same one used for mastering. And what I basically do is I take each of the bands of frequencies, or like the kind of like the groups of frequencies here, and I'm either going to push them forward in you know, the music listening spectrum. So this is your left ear, your right ear, and what feels like in front of you. And I'm gonna try to like spread out some of the higher frequencies, and then keep close the middle ones so that we're like well grounded. And the way that I'm pushing these around is basically I'm trying to find places where the frequencies really change, good dividing parts. It's a little bit of trial and error, just like everything in this. So, you know, I'm trying my best to explain. It will feel louder, so, you know, you might want to adjust. Now that I'm happy with the rhythm, let's move on to the lead guitars. I'm going to add the same effects again, and we'll take them one by one. A particular place I think we should check out is where there's a lot of lead guitars though. So let's listen and do our classic low pass, high pass. Now the choice I made here was I wanted to kill all of this stuff where the rhythm guitars are, the bass guitars are, and basically make it so that we're only hearing the frequencies that I made room for in the rhythm guitars and the drums and stuff, you know, the higher frequencies. Now I'm going to kill some of the nasally frequencies so that we still have a lot of space, but the lead guitars don't feel like blatantly in your face and gross. That's one. Again, all we're really doing here is trying to find bad sounding frequencies when they're boosted, or ones that sound bad already, and then just tuck them down. So now I'm pretty happy. I don't feel like I'm listening to someone play on a backing track, which I personally think is probably the worst way to go about this, because you're spending so much time making each instrument its own. Treat them all, you know, like they're all working together as a song. That's why I never like using the word backing track unless I'm explicitly talking about playing the main melody over the tracks and like giving them for practice. Now I'm gonna compress these also the same way I did with the rhythm guitar, except I'm basically again focused on controlling it and I don't want to ruin the sound. So let's make sure that our volume is fine. Now, I don't like when it gets so loud, so I'm actually going to use the compressor to lower. Again, you know, use as many things as you can as a reference. Take everything with a grain of salt. I'm pretty happy with the lead guitars just having those two effects, but many people like adding like a chorus or some sort of spreader. And right now I don't think we have to do that, but I want to kind of go over what I would do, because basically this was requested. This whole thing was kind of like requested as a what would I do. So I'm going to add this free Blue Cat stereo VST that I found, and hopefully I'll remember to list all of them. And I'm just going to like solo it out so I can hear what it's doing. So again, wet means the effect is on, dry means it's not. So all this really does is adds that quivering chorus effect by it's like a delay, but the frequency of it is phase shifted in such a way that it gives you that spacey feeling. And the idea is when we have all these lead guitars, it's gonna kind of spread out stuff. So I left the spread very small because I don't want it to get in the way of like our cymbals, which I have panned around like 60%, and you know, anything else. So I'm pretty happy with the lead guitars now. Now let's move to the bass. I like to keep the bass and the rhythm guitar very interlocked. I don't want to necessarily hear the bass, but I do need to feel it. And I mean, I need to hear it too, just not at the same degree. So what I actually like to do is add to each type of bass tone its own individual EQ. So listening to this, we have a lot of higher frequencies, but they're gonna get muffled anyway by the distorted bass and by every other instrument. So let's just cut it off shorter. Let's listen to it in the mix, of course. I like to kind of descend it slower here. So now it's not so painfully obvious that there's a bass guitar trying to match everything. I'll put a low cut as well, but we do want that rumble, so I'm not gonna cut it off too much. Let's play back again. Now we can tell the peaks are hitting at like 100. Based on where your bass guitar controls are, I have mine set to where it's half the neck pickup and half the bridge pickup. So we're basically kind of picking which frequency area we're gonna like hit up and boost. So I like to keep it there. It gives it a bit of an aggressive attack, and it still sounds really good for you know, something funkier. And what we're kind of going for here is just, you know, don't get in the way of the kick from the drum kit or the rhythm guitar. So we're gonna like start cutting away from there. And as you can see, there's like this huge hill of a thing that just like stays up there. I don't want it to stay up there. So basically I want it kind of controlled. So I'm using EQ to control it, which makes no sense. But no, it kind of works. And now we have a compressor here. So I'm gonna compress it like maybe like 4 to 5. Let's hear how that sounds. I'm gonna keep the attacks a little loose, but we're gonna be much more compressy with the distorted bass anyway. So now we can hear the blend of the distorted bass. So I'm gonna add the EQ and compression to that. And we're gonna do something similar, but I'm gonna chop off the bass, more of the bass, because this bass guitar is doing the job. So, you know, why get in the way? We can kind of focus them on different groups and interlap around where they cross over in the 100 to 500 lower mids and bass area. And this is where the guitars come in, so I kind of want to like chop away a little bit of that. Just simple like that, and then I'm gonna add a very harsh compressor so that we can, you know, because we don't care about the tonality of hearing the distorted bass. It's not there for that. That's what the rhythm guitar is for. I just want to bring out more. Now let's listen to some different parts too, of course. So I think that sounds pretty great now. Last thing I'm going to do is kind of like show a EQing the synthesizers and whatnot. So let's listen to that, because basically this is where I want to fill in the gaps. And we don't have gaps in our bass. We have gaps in everywhere else. High pass, low pass, as always. We'll just set it like here and kind of bring them in. So basically we're getting a lot of noise effects and we're getting a lot of guitars. And what we want from the guitars is probably more of the upper end, and we have the bass guitar filling in. So let's hear it together and kind of cut away. So basically what I did there, and sorry, let me bring it back up. What I kind of did here was, you know, our rhythm guitars are coming in, the bass is obviously being filled up by a lot, and then we've got our lead guitars kind of coming in pockets. So I just looked for areas where we're just making too much noise and, you know, opened up pockets. And now you can hear the strings. They're in there, but... And at our ending, we also have it. Now we want to make sure you can still hear it when it's quiet. So that's where the compressor comes in. So let's do the same thing. We find where the volume's starting to like fade or where we want it to stay, and then we're gonna see how much we want to act on it. A lot of clean guitars have compressors in the chain. But, so the quality of the sound is already kind of smushed. The dynamics, how much it's changing, all those details to the tone are already shifting. So we don't need to kind of be panicky about that. I'm going to reduce the attack and release so that we have it come in a very like smooth sort of way, especially the strings. Now all we really need to do is open up the reverb and kind of cut away where it gets muddy, which is usually the lower mid to mid area, and then we're pretty much set to go. So what I did there was added the snare to the reverb just so that I could get a little more power in each hit, but I might take it out. It's all creative decisions. So around this riff area, I feel like it's kind of empty, so I'm going to add some of our effects back. These are all the MIDI things. If I haven't explained enough, I'm filling in the space by panning these lead guitars a little to the left and a little to the right. I find that the harmonized parts, you know, the ones that aren't the main melody, should be quieter. So hopefully this kind of spreads it out. My background lead guitar is around 50, just because that's a space unoccupied. And I put like the bell towards the right, because there's no guitars going on during the bell. That'll hit around the right side. Now all we really need to do to mix properly is just drop all these volumes to nothing and then just see how we like it. So definitely do that. I start with drums, bass, rhythm, lead, and synth, and then reverb. So I'll give it a shot. And just because I think it's important, if you go to master, and you can click this button here and click volume and visible, or you just hit V. You can hold shift down and put points where you want fading in and out in Reaper. So I wanted it to start fading here, so I clicked there, then I clicked another one and dragged it to infinity. Same thing can be done here. So I'm going to click while holding shift there, and then I'm going to drag the beginning to nothing. Maybe we'll move it over. Maybe we'll move it over really far. So things are starting to sound pretty good. What you want to do is take a break every however long, maybe 30 minutes or more, when mixing, especially with headphones, and listen to something else if you have to. Listen to silence, get your bearings, go back to your mix, see if it sounded like poop or if it sounded like something good. Now, the number one thing I will say before we get into mastering is you cannot polish a turd. It's a very common industry saying that I just like really enjoy because I get to say turd. And the thing is, if your mix sucks, if your playing was kind of off, not your best day or whatever, then you really can't expect it to magically turn better when we run through a very short amount of steps. Now, I've done mastering for a lot of my friends and various YouTubers. And the reason why, of course, is just because there's a lot of complicated tools that do somewhat simple things. And a lot of the times you can make or break a song with it if you're looking at it the wrong way. But as long as the song was originally great, you're just not going to have any problems. So take a good look at your mix. Show it to a friend. The way I see it, if you forget to run through a limiter and master and finish a song because you thought it was already done, that's the time to master your mix, when it's just so good you can't believe that you didn't finish it already. So think about that, and we'll begin mastering next time.